Nothing says cinematic more than a really wide aspect ratio, and the easiest and cheapest way to achieve that is of course just to crop standard 16:9 video into the desired wide shape, either leaving black bars above and below it, or enlarging it to fit a wider project. But we can do better than that by using anamorphic lenses to not only maximise the vertical quality, but also capture some of those optical artefacts that most of us associate with big budget Hollywood productions. Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this video is all about using anamorphic lenses, and to demonstrate I'll be reviewing the new Sirui 20mm T1.8 1.33x anamorphic lens with autofocus. Originally announced in early 2025, it's Sirui's second anamorphic lens with autofocus, following the earlier 40mm, and it's a capability that's still unusual for this type of lens. It costs around $700 and is available in Sony E, Nikon Z, Fujifilm X, Micro Four Thirds and now L-mount versions, and while it is officially designed for cameras with Super 35 or APS-C sensors, the imaging circle actually covers a larger area, approaching full frame. So with this in mind, I tested the latest L-mount version of the lens on the new Lumix S12 body, exploiting not just its open gate capabilities to measure the maximum recording area that's possible, but also the partially stacked sensor and anamorphic stabilization to really see what this lens is capable of. So let's start with a quick look around the lens. The 20mm T1.8 has an aluminium shell, measures 86mm in diameter, around 92mm in length, depending on the mount, and weighs around 480 grams. Like other lenses designed for cinema cameras, it's a solid piece of kit, well built and weather sealed with a rubber grommet at the mount. Note the USB-C port on the mount for firmware updates. The aperture ring runs from T1.8 to T22 in third stop increments, with an A position for body-based control, and a switch to D-click for smooth and silent adjustments if preferred. Meanwhile, the free spinning manual focusing ring feels silky smooth in operation, and both it and the aperture ring are geared, allowing motorized control in a cinema rig. At the end of the barrel is a 77mm filter thread, and peering through the lens reveals the oval opening of an anamorphic system, more about which in just a moment. But first the autofocus, starting here with a static subject and a single AF area and the lens wide open at T1.8. You'll notice the focus pulls are pretty leisurely but smooth, although I have mistakenly moved the camera before the focusing process was complete. Now it is slow compared to lenses designed for stills photography, but again it is rare to find autofocus on any cinema lenses, especially an anamorphic. You can see this again in my face tracking test using the full focusing area and the lens again at T1.8. You'll need to give the camera and the lens a couple of seconds to completely lock onto a subject that's moved, making it more suitable for setting up shots of more static subjects rather than tracking those that are in motion. That said, it is quicker and more convenient than manually focusing in most situations, making it convenient for run and gun style shooting. Now for the optics, which like all anamorphic lenses squeezes the field of view horizontally into a narrower shape. This particular lens employs a 1.33x squeeze, but other anamorphics could have a 1.6 or even 2x squeeze. So here's a clip straight out of camera filmed in the S12's APS-C mode where everything looks thin. So this needs to be stretched horizontally by the same squeeze factor, so for this lens that's 1.33x. Now since I started by recording 16:9 shaped video, I've now ended up with a wider shape of around 2.4:1, and that's popular for big budget movies and TV shows. In terms of horizontal coverage, I've also ended up capturing a field of view that's roughly equivalent to 22mm on full frame, and I'm guessing that's a lot wider than you'd be expecting for a 20mm lens on a cropped APS-C sensor. Now if you're new to anamorphic, you may be wondering why you just don't film standard 16:9 video and simply crop it vertically to achieve the same shape. Now that is of course possible, but in doing so you're going to be throwing away vertical resolution. In contrast, anamorphic lenses let you maintain the original height of your footage for better quality. So in my examples, here filmed in 4K, I still have 2160 pixels in height after stretching the image horizontally. Whereas if I'd started with 2160 pixels and cropped it into the same shape, I'd have reduced the vertical resolution to 1600 pixels, or roughly 3/4 what I started with. When projected on the big screen, this makes a visible difference, and in fact anamorphic lenses were originally developed for film use, allowing wider movies to be squeezed onto standard, narrower film stock. Not only was this type of film cheaper, but you could run it through normal cameras and projectors too. The only difference was to film with an anamorphic lens to squeeze the wide view onto the narrower frame, and to project it with a lens that stretches it back out again. This squeeze and stretch process maximised the quality versus masking the top and bottom of the frame. This did get me wondering how much resolution I could actually squeeze out the lens though, so I switched the S1 II into its 3x2 open gate mode to record the full sensor, that's 6000 by 4000 pixels across the full frame area. Here you can see it's unsurprisingly suffering from vignetting or darkening in the corners, as well as substantial pincushion distortion. So let's see how much of the frame is actually usable. First things first, we need to apply a 1.33 times horizontal stretch to get it into the correct shape. And for this scene, I actually don't really mind the distortion and vignetting too much at the sides. You will however notice that this stretch hasn't filled my cinematic 2.4:1 project, and that's because I started with a 3x2 shape, which with that stretch is only going to give me a ratio of about 2:1. So let's now gradually zoom in to fill the full width of my frame, which has involved a 1.18 times crop. I've effectively cropped my original footage into a 16:9 shape so that it de-squeezes into my desired 2.4:1 project shape. Now switching between this and the APS-C version, you'll of course see the difference in coverage and corner artifacts. The tighter APS-C version looks better corrected, but I still quite like the look of the full frame version with its artifacts. In fact, if you rewatch many older blockbuster movies filmed with anamorphics, you may also notice distortion at the edges. But the point of this exercise is to see how much we need to crop into that full frame version before it becomes acceptable for more general use. Now your mileage and preferences will vary, but I reckon at about 1.3 to 1.4 times total crop, the corner artifacts may remain visible, but become much less of a distraction. Sure, there's still some pincushion distortion and vignetting at the sides, but they're not bothering me at this point, and you can of course also reduce them a bit in post if you like. So I started with a 6000 by 4000 pixel full frame open gate image, and after a de-squeeze and a mild crop overall, that gives me around 15% greater vertical and horizontal resolution than starting with an APS-C 4K frame, while also capturing a wider field of view. Score! But remember, you're only going to be getting this potential resolution boost from using full frame if your camera offers more than 4K recording to start with. If your camera only offers 4K maximum, or you just choose to film in 4K, then making any crop to it will of course reduce the detail. But with this lens, filming in full frame at any resolution will still give you the option of slightly broader coverage if you want to experiment. But for the least mucking around, I'd say stick to filming 4K in APS-C with this particular lens. The important part to avoid losing vertical resolution though is to ensure that your editing software matches the wider shape and resolution of your de-squeezed footage. So let's say you want to end up with a cinematic looking 2.4:1 shape. If your software is set to a less wide 16:9 project, then your anamorphic footage will already be filling the width and you'll need to squash it vertically to look right, and doing so will lose some of that precious vertical resolution. So to avoid losing these pixels, you should set your software editor to a wider 2.4:1 shape project, matching your desired final shape, and with a 2160 pixel height. This time your anamorphic footage already fills the full height of the frame, so you'll only need to stretch it horizontally to meet the edges. So look for a preset that maintains your 4K height of 2160 pixels but has a wider shape than 16:9. For example, how about a 5K project, they have those in Final Cut, with 5120 by 2160 pixels, and something like that will deliver the desired 2.4:1 shape and again maintain your vertical resolution of 4K footage. And that's what I've done here. YouTube will actually play this in the correct shape, while other players and screens will just add whatever black bars they need. For my slightly higher resolution footage, I could either edit in a 6K project or a custom size. But while Anamorphic was originally developed to maximize vertical detail and deliver on cheaper stock cameras and projectors, it's the optical side effects of that squeeze that modern filmmakers desire most of all. This squeeze and stretch can result in some unique looking bokeh and stylized lens flares that have become associated with big budget Hollywood blockbusters, and they're even emulated in some VFX scenes. So before showing more footage, here's a clip I filmed with the aperture wide open at T1.8 from the minimum focusing distance of around 40cm to show the potential for background blur and bokeh style. Now for more clips filmed with the lens around Brighton during the day and night to demonstrate what's possible. Let's start with the all-important lens flares. In my own tests, I needed a very bright light source and to be pointing directly at it to trigger this effect to any significant degree. For example, pointing directly at the sun should give you the typical flare of an anamorphic lens with a horizontal stripe. Note the blue colour here to the flare, with Sirui actually offering two different versions of the lens, one that gives these blue flares for a colder sci-fi look, and the other more neutral coloured flares. You'll also ideally want dark portions on the frame to show up the flare, so in daytime you could always place the sun or bright light behind some foliage, or perhaps have it peeking out between other moving subjects, like this fairground ride. And as a side note, see how I failed to get the lights on the actual ride itself to generate much flare, leaving it mostly to the sun in the background. Car headlamps are another ideal source of potential flare, and their nighttime surroundings mean the flare will be easily visible, but again you'll really need the light to be pointing as much as possible into the lens. Now you might achieve a sufficient effect by standing at the side of a road, but for greater impact try standing at a corner and have the cars turn into the frame, as at some point the headlight will be pointing directly into the lens. Just make sure that you're also filming from a low enough height to maximise that effect. Beyond lens flares, also look out for potential bokeh blobs in the distance, as these too can take on a different shape due to the anamorphic process. And it's these characteristics that give your footage a different look to using standard lenses and simply cropping a normal frame into a wider shape. Sure, sometimes it can feel a little bit contrived, composing or even seeking out scenes and subjects just to deliberately trigger the flare effect, but that is the point of having an anamorphic lens today for most filmmakers. If you're into these effects, you'll want an anamorphic lens in your collection. You can also use anamorphics for stills photography, again applying the required stretch to achieve a correct shape. If you're starting with a more traditional photo shape of 3x2, then a 1.33 times stretch will give you a wider 2:1 image, while again maintaining the vertical resolution. Nice for panoramas. As with video, you could deliberately embrace flares or unusual bokeh to make the photos stand out. It can certainly be fun to shoot anamorphic stills as an alternative way to achieve panoramic compositions without cropping and losing quality. As for the Sirui lens, it performed well in my tests, well corrected across the APS-C frame as advertised, and capable of extending a little beyond for full frame owners who want to experiment a bit. The flares may not be as dramatic as some traditional anamorphic lenses, but the trade-off is having a fairly compact model in relative terms, and I did find the autofocus capability really useful for quickly setting up shots. Just be sure to give the camera and lens time to lock onto your subject, as the process isn't as quick as most modern autofocus lenses. And that's it for this review. If you found it useful, please consider giving my channel a follow, and if you're thinking about buying the lens at Amazon, enter code GORDON5OFF at checkout for a 5% discount, and I've got direct links for you in the description. Let me know in the comments if you're using or thinking about anamorphic lenses. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.